Now we're going to build a diff for the Mi4 LP, along with shocks and tyres, one of the most important parts of a touring car. This is all the parts of the diff laid out and the greases required. First part of the diff build is placing the fences on the pulleys. It can be a bit tricky, but I'll show you an easy way. We're going to fit the fence to the pulley. It can be a bit tight and a bit tricky to get on. So what I do is, with a scalpel, just roll around the inside edge. Just take away some of the sharp edges, just to make it a little easier to get on. It's still got to snap on fairly tight, because you don't want it being loose and coming off. But you just want to make it a little bit easier, so just roll this round. And then also check the direction of the fence. There's a rounded edge on the top. That needs to go towards the teeth, so the belt is guided in the right area. So we should be able to just snap that on, check it's all in place, and the pulley's ready to go. Now we're going to sand the diff plates. These are new diff plates, but I'd still sand them. They're never perfectly flat as they're stamped out. I'm going to use a diff half and some 1500 wet and dry paper. Just going to lubricate the paper slightly, put the plate down, and just in a circular motion flatten the plate off on a flat surface. I'm going to probably spend 2-3 minutes on each side, just to make sure they're perfectly flat. When it's all done, you should have a nice flat plate. Next step is to give everything a good clean. Okay, so I've put all the diff parts into the lid of a motor spray. I've got the ceramic balls in a separate dish, just to make it easier to keep them apart. The diff rings that I sanded earlier in there, everything's in there apart from the 2 bearings, the dust cap and the small grub screw. No real need to clean those. So I'm going to take some motor spray, spray it in the cap and some more in the dish with the balls, give them a bit of a rinse round, and then I've got a little brush just to clean everything through. You can take the pulley, dust it round, just got all the old grease, dirt, everything out of the pulley. This was a new diff, but you might be able to see there's still some dirt in there. It's worth cleaning even new parts just to get mould release, fingerprints, all sorts of things off. Got everything out of the pot and onto a clean piece of tissue, nicely dried off and ready to build. Very important part of a good diff, getting the thrust race right. A few things you need to pay attention to. The washers that go on the thrust race, there's one either side. One is slightly smaller than the other. The one that's smallest needs to go on first to the screw, so on the outside of the thrust race. So first of all, I'm going to put that small one on the screw. Then I'm going to take some grease. This is the black grease. The white, there's 2 greases. The white grease goes on the main diff balls, the black grease always goes in the thrust race. Just going to put a smearing of this around the thrust washer. Then I'm going to take the actual thrust race, the part with the small balls. It doesn't really matter which way round this goes, there's an open side and a closed side, but it doesn't really matter, just slide that on. That's that part. And then we're just going to put a bit more grease around the top half, just over the balls. And then take the second washer, the slightly larger one, place that over the top, and then just give it a bit of a wipe off the excess grease. Moving on to the cone washers now. These are quite important you get these in the right place. There's 4 cone washers, and when put together they have to act as a spring. So one must be outwards, inwards, outwards, inwards. So we're just going to place those on. So the first one outwards, then inwards, outwards again, and inwards on the last one. You can see once they're stacked up they become a spring. The next stage is to insert this into the diff half.
Yeah, just cup your fingers on the diff.
This is the long female diff half with the hole straight the way through. So we drop the thrust race in, and at this point we'll lose the screw. The screw will fall all the way through. That's fine. We don't need that at the moment. Then we've got a little spacer shim which just sits on top. It's got a shoulder on it, the shoulder goes to the outside. That just drops in place. And then the last piece. So now we're just going to place the circlip in place. The circlip is on the circlip pliers already, ready to go. And with the circlip, you need to pay attention to the direction. There's a rounded edge and a square edge where the circlip is stamped out basically. So the square edge needs to go upwards so that it holds against the edge of the diff half. So I'm just going to place that in, a little squeeze, and it should just fall into place. And then just with another driver, just make sure everything's located and it's in the slot, and then that part's ready. Now we're going to mount the diff plates to the diff halves. We're going to use the white grease, Schumacher white grease, the same grease that you use on the balls and the fronts of the plates. We're going to use on the back of the plate against the diff half. There's no locating ring here, it's basically a round washer on a round bed, so we need the grease to hold it in place. You must use the white grease. This is a silicone grease, so it grips and doesn't slip, so it'll hold the ring in place and stop it from sliding. Okay, so we're going to take some of the white grease on a flat bladed driver and just dab it round the outside of the half. Don't have to be too accurate with this, just get it on the line where it sits. Then I'm going to take one of the rings and just place it in place there. And we just do that with both of them. Now we're going to grease the plates and add the pulley. We're going to use the white grease again, same grease as we used in the previous step. We're going to use quite a bit. Take a good helping, lay it round the plates, quite a healthy amount. You want this to work its way in and keep the diff nice and smooth. We're going to add the bearings. Important about the bearings, again, to pay attention to the placement. There's a slightly thicker bearing and a thinner bearing and a little washer. The thicker bearing goes on first. This is the same thickness as the pulley, so it holds the pulley nice and square. Then the small shim washer, just to separate the bearings so they don't bind together. And then the last thin bearing there. Then place the pulley in place. And I just sort of rock it backwards and forwards a little bit just to get a little bit of grease into the holes of the pulley. With some grease on the end of the driver there, we're just going to pick the balls up and place them in. Grease works really well because it just helps you dab the ball and get it in place nice and easy. You don't really want to lose these. The ball seated in place. We've greased the second half in exactly the same way, and we're just going to now just place them together. With everything in place, we're going to put the final screw in now, the actual diff screw that will set the tension. It's a difficult thing to explain this, but we'll do the tension later when we're doing final tuning in the car. But basic setting is just screw it into place until you get a resistance, basically just the screw just comes to a stop, just gently, and then give it an extra half a turn, so squash in the spring washers a little bit. And then we're going to take the grub screw on a separate driver, and this goes in the other side. It's very important, this grub screw. This basically stops the diff coming apart when you're on the track. So screw that one in until again you get resistance because it's hit the main diff screw. And then using both drivers, you're going to basically screw them towards each other so you lock everything in place.